It's today in EVE Online. I am Matterall. November 25, 2019. Today with me, I have a couple friends, three friends. We have Caleb,
Hey guys.
Lichgrave,
Hey.
and Delacar is here
Good morning.
from Test. Actually, let's start with you, Delacar, because there was something on Reddit here talking about Brave and Test drop dreads and diplomats are mad. What was that about?
That is a great question. I'm pulling up what I have to look at just to make sure I don't say the wrong thing. I suspect it has to do along the lines of scaling engagements, right? There's a certain level that once you take it to dropping dreads, the powers that be get a little antsy. Sort of like how 15 dreads dropped is not as much of a political issue as when you start threatening things like 100, because you can do a lot more with 100 dreads than you can with 15, for example.
Well, here it is. This guy, Inhabited Soup, says, I'm the FC that led the Goon Fleet. I'll post a brief AAR, that's after action report, below. But first, I can say this fight was in fact not prearranged, though I have developed contacts with people who live in that area. So, okay, I guess the premise, the headline is it was a prearranged fight, which is kind of, a bogus fight. We call those slap fights until we figure out a better way to describe them. And that it was a prearranged fight that diplomats got really mad about. And this is news because recently there's been kind of a weird split between the FCs that want to fight, like Pittsburgh, and the diplomats that don't want them to fight because they have mutual defense agreements that they don't want strained. And Pittsburgh basically, I think, caused enough rift there that he had to go, and he was a very popular FC. And that's kind of the very high level story there. Some people say from the Imperium side there were previous issues with him not being very obedient towards the diplomatic line and that sort of thing, but we don't really know. So this is another crack.
If a story like that escalates to leadership, someone's going to get shot.
Well, it depends.
If you say so.
If a problem exists that needs to be escalated to the point of the CEO, usually someone is going to be yelled at. And if they respond in a way that might not be optimal, they will be shot in the face.
Nah, I don't buy it. I think it was I mean, what you're saying may be true, but the whole thing of the CEO is so busy and isolated that he can't really be bothered with anything, and then if it comes to him, it means that it's something that he has to act on. I think that's way too glamorous a lifestyle for EVE Online, right? You're in a group, you probably see that people are causing problems. I'm thinking of Vince Drake in here, and he just ignores it. Why? Because you got to let these guys blow off steam. You got to let them do stuff, and then at a certain point, they give a warning and say, "Well, in Vince's world, it would be very colorful, right?"
Take the example of when Boat lost his Titan keys, right? When he was removed from the right to use Titans and fleets. It's similar. If he had been making an issue of that, then he would have risked being shot.
Well, that's a different thing, right? If you're saying Pittsburgh was shot for being disobedient, I guess that's a different issue. I don't know.
It's not so much disobedient. It's how you react to when someone is putting the foot down, saying, "Okay, this is the consequence. You have to deal with that, and you have to stop doing what you're doing." And if you then make a case of it, or make an issue of it, or start posting or talking to people, then you're just creating internal strife and problems, and that's not accepted from any leader.
Right. I think.
Have you tried running just something like a 500-man group, right? When you get issues like this, personalities that challenge you or speak in a negative tone about something that you've decided, or creates turmoil of any kind, you're going to have to remove them. There's no other way.
Except when I do it, it's called censorship, right? Is that what you're talking about?
It's a little bit different, right? Because it's not as serious in TIS as it is when you're actually responsible for the people. You're not responsible for the users of the service, right? You're really not responsible for 2,000 or 3,000 people. But if you are responsible for a group of anything 500 people and above, if there is issues or things start brewing and personal disagreements and shit like that, it can explode very, very fast. And you need to have procedures that just goes, this is not acceptable. There is zero tolerance for stuff like that. It's how I created my first corporation in Eve ever. I pretty much created strife, and I split the group that I was in down the middle, right? Pretty intentional, because the CEO was an idiot. And that's what can happen if you allow that to grow and fester.
But I think in Pittsburgh's case, he said that the thing happened and he was told, like, hey, man, don't fight back. Just keep quiet. And he did. But
I don't know the details. I just know
that's what he said.
Yeah, I just know that when it escalates to CEO level, someone is going to get a bit of a ruffle. That's for sure.
Well, I have a bit of an issue with that, because oftentimes what I have seen in my community and what works best is that the CEO is often not the head diplo. The CEO makes decisions based on the vision and the execution of steps within the corp, maybe on a broader scale than a day-to-day scale. Different CEOs have a different approach. But I know that one of the things that really works well for test is that the diplomats at the end of the day are given the time and not extra roles to be able to go and do what they need to do to deal with the human element. And so that's why when we're talking about FCs, it's a little tricky, because FCs are given a lot more autonomy than the regular line member. And so when you're dealing with issues that are complex, not just within your own group, but relations with another group, the actual discussions and the precedence that is set is going to be done by diplos in channels that shouldn't be visible for line members. I personally can't say to whether or not test leaned on goons. To my knowledge and what I've seen, I personally, as a line member in that regard, in terms of access, don't think so. There wasn't this sentiment the day after a significant one. Obviously, there's always one or two guys who meme on the forums, but there wasn't a significant sentiment of like, oh, grr, especially grr the goons this morning or whatever.
Well, ProGod gave him permission, basically said, go ahead, man, keep doing it. Our diplos won't raise a fuss. And that's what he wrote. Not the time that Pittsburgh got kicked, but the time before that. And I think Ron, was it, basically said that their diplos did not ask for his head. So at least the leadership of Test wasn't involved in getting Pitts kicked from all reports that we've had. But what is happening, I think, is that there is some grumbling about why do Goonswarm have Fortizars in our space, and why are they attacking us with those? From the F1 pushers, let's say. Have you heard anything along those lines, or is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's about right. I would say that there are not insignificant number of people in test who are asking, why are these forts here? And there's just been a slow educational process explaining to them, hey, we have an agreement with goons. When we originally wanted to move down here, they were originally going to side with the people who were living here. We ended up winning that one, and so they sat down at the at the table with the actors that were still around. And in order to make it amicable or figure it out, there was a bit of a political climate set at that time. And this is one of those, no one quite remembers exactly why they're there unless you're high up enough in leadership that you were there at the table at the time. And so, yeah, there are members, F1 pushers or line bros or however you want to describe them, who don't have a whole lot of details, who are like, how come they can stage stuff so close to us? But in reality, without sitting down, like I would hesitate to say that we would not want that, because I don't know whether leadership feels like it's a good idea or not. Because there's an argument to be said about having some danger close to not only your group but your coalition, right? It allows you to continue to sharpen your swords and use them on a frequent basis. And I think that we can't exactly. I would hesitate to rule out the possibility that test leadership looks at it as not a significant threat to our existence, but more an opportunity to invite some consensual PvP on a frequent basis.
Right. Well, that's the thing, though. If you're telling your people we're powerful, we've made it, we rate, we're at the top level of this game, and they're feeling it, right? Because they won UALX. I'm talking about Test here, who runs Legacy, a coalition. And they won Providence, and they were on a bit of a winning streak, and they actually now won the Winter War. Like, they got to be feeling pretty good about what they're capable of with their military leaders. And then you have this weird sore point where another group that's even bigger than you has their claws in your territory and can use them if they want to. And that's got to be like, well, wait a minute. Are you telling us that we're not pets, or are we, are we our own man here? Like, why are we not independent of these Fortizars in our territory? It just seems kind of weird. But again, that's diplomatics for you, right? It is a non-invasion pact that we know exists, but it's also mutual defense, because if these two groups split, then the world becomes a more interesting place as far as we're concerned, because now you have two big groups near each other that are able to go to war. We saw that with Winter Coalition and Legacy, but I think Winter was on the rise. They weren't an established big power. I think it would be different. I'm not hoping for that. I'm just saying it is interesting. And I do think if you have morale up and Test feels pretty strong, they still have to look at this and say, like, why does Imperium have threads through our space? And why are they using them to pull every once in a while? Now, you're saying that's good for practice, good for fun, but I don't know. It seems to go against the kinds of things we should be seeing with empire. What do you call it? Just control over your borders, kind of
continuity.
Continuity. There's another word for it that I can't. It's not cohesion either, but basically that sort of a thing, right? Like we should not have foreign fingers in our territory.
And I hear you on that, and I think there is some truth to that. I know personally that in the conversations that I have, and if I were to give an opinion on it, it would be that I'm not sure I know the answer to what it would cost to try and purge or keep up such an appearance. Because to me, I feel like the difference between them being in catch and them being in ESO is very, very huge in my mind. If goons, maybe because I do a lot of my time now that we're not deployed back in Esoteria, I feel as a home region that as long as there aren't any in either Esoteria or Paragon Soul, that I'm okay with it. But if there was, let's say a Goon Fortizar in VYJ, for example, which can cover a significant portion of Esoteria and where we work mine and Super Capital Rat, we would be singing a bit of a different tune. I feel like it's just far enough that for the majority of line members, I would take a risk and say that it's sort of out of sight, out of mind. And although there would be those that always beat the drums of war, and hey, how come we don't have this? Because we're good, and a lot of us are kind of riding on that high. There was a lot of elation when Billy said, "All right, we're done. They're gone" for Winter Co. That was a really great moment for a lot of us who had spent hundreds of hours or more. But I don't think we immediately transitioned into, all right, time to completely clean up.
What's next? Yeah. No, I get it. This is funny. Somebody asked, what are we mad about today? Today, we're mad about we're looking at tests saying like, why do you allow goons to have Fortizars in your space? I honestly think that to prevent the situation, that the Imperium is acting proactively to prevent test guys from getting mad at them for having those Fortizars there, and that's what it's about. So test may not have put any pressure on Goonswarm, but and Goonswarm leads the Imperium coalition, but I think it's a proactive measure to keep tensions from getting high, because that would create a problem for them, a political problem for them down the road. So I think that's what's going on. But anyway, the point that we bring this up again, we're talking about the Pittsburgh incident where he left and he was a well-known Goonswarm FC that was essentially pushed out because there's another fight between Brave and Test and Goons. And so there's this echo of like, and diplomats are furious, and that may not be the case at all, but that's why it's in the news, and that's why it's getting some traction there on Reddit. Thanks, man. Thanks for all that insight. I think you're right. Okay, let's move on to. There was something here. It was Tweet Fleet. Yeah, we're gonna look at Eve London real quick. Did you guys watch Eve London?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
What do you guys think?
Well, it was revamp of or remake of Vegas, right? It was a lot of vague posting and a few really good things.
Oh, come on. I'm hype. I loved a lot of it. I love the energy. I thought it was neat. I don't mind the vagueness.
No large banner to get behind, but that's okay. Lots of very small changes. I mean, I say small, right? The devs are coming to play with us again as devs, not shadows in the background. So that's fun. We have the market update coming and all this.
Well, let's start with that. Let's start with devs coming to play EVE Online. What's that mean for you guys? Well, what do you think it means?
We can finally get rid of that whole "the devs don't play the game" meme. And
is T20 finally buried?
For fuck's sake, he's been buried for almost a decade. Can we just let that fucking dead horse lie?
I'm super excited because to me, I think it's going to be an opportunity for the devs to really get to appreciate the more intricate parts of the work that they've done. If I was developing EVE Online for many, many years and was involved in some way or shape or form of a change in nullsec and never really got to see like just how interesting or what it affects on a day-to-day life perspective, there have been those kinds of changes where I know that like I've logged in and thought, oh, awesome, that's live now. That's my new reality. And I think for them, they're going to be able to finally get the ability to just enjoy the fruits of their labor in a way that hasn't been allowed for a long time. I mean, I wasn't playing when T20 happened, but I know who he is and what his story is. That's how crazy it is. And I'm really happy that we're going to be able to dispel that and just let the CCP devs go wild and enjoy it and go out and do whatever almost anything they want.
Well, a question from Jaliant here who says, won't devs become incredibly biased?
No.
Potentially. I mean, as they play one side of the game, yes. But then at the same time, who cares, right? So, and I've talked about this as players, right? The whole StarCraft comparison that I've made before. Why it's okay for us to be biased. Now, as developers, right, when you have people who don't know the game, it's like if they're biased, that means they understand at least part of the game, right?
And how? I don't understand what does.
Well, if they're on if they're on a certain corp and their corp is getting whomped, are they gonna? Who knows? Are they gonna influence the direction of events in any way? I think this goes back to, and this is a question I'll pick up from Peanut Pete here. What is T20? So with a quick explanation, T20 was a CCP dev. His name was CCP T20. I believe he was Icelandic, and he was there early on in EVE Online's development history. So he was there, we're talking 2004, 2005. And back then, the devs could play the game. They could play it more or less in secret. I don't think they they never brought a lot of attention to themselves, but it was discovered through some nefarious ways where a guy hacked into a group called Band of Brothers, Bob, their forums, and they basically exposed that this CCP Dev T20 had spawned and left some. He actually, I believe technically what he did was he increased the chances of the group being able to get rare loot, and then he left that loot behind when he took off. And that was considered cheating. So he was basically cheating. And so that created a big rift because the people that they were fighting at the time were Goonswarm, and they raised a big fuss about it. And the game was very, that was seen as a bad thing because you can't have devs kind of propagating stuff. So what's happened since then is that's something that Goonswarm specifically has always brought up again, that, Bob cheated against them, and T20 was their poster boy for that sort of thing. But what that really did inside of the company is they said, okay, we got to grow up. We got to create an internal affairs, and we're going to lock off our devs from players. And if you play, you got to play in total secret. If you're discovered, we're going to take away everything that you created with that character, and you got to retire that character. And any characters you had before, we're going to take those from you. And then when you leave CCP, we'll give them back to you, maybe. So the idea was that no bias.
The whole thing was a non-issue, almost like, within a year, pretty much. The procedures were there. It would never actually be repeated. It was completely impossible. And today, the oversight from any account with the whole tool set of GMs available is completely logged and checked all the fucking time. So nothing like this can ever happen again, and it's not been possible for many, many years. But this story, because it's a trust-based story, right? From way back in the day when the game was completely different, everyone is just still piling on it.
Not
as if
everyone.
It's a reason.
It's a weapon. It's a weapon used against CCP.
It's a mistrust weapon against CCP, and it's completely bogus. I can be a very, very sharp critic against CCP when they're doing fuck ups.
That's right.
But when it comes to T20, right, this is a non-story, and it's not been a story for many years. And people that keep mentioning it are retards, idiots, because they do not have any idea. They must have come into the game way late when they actually were not around to actually experience this, and why it was a problem, because it was also a fairly small issue that of course was politicized, because I think it was only a handful of BPOs, and many groups had way more than that after the lottery. So it wasn't even a massive advantage.
Yeah, but it was a Saber BPO. The Saber is a T2
yeah,
BPO.
But many player groups had BPOs that were as valuable, or at least of a similar benefit. So the benefit was pretty much removed after the lottery. Then you can talk about the whole legacy fact that people that were in the lottery had a massive advantage until they fixed it with invention. And that took a long time. That was actually a bigger problem than the T20 incident.
Yeah, but I think perspective's lost over time.
Yeah, overall, I think the real issue became that it was a game about the players. It was about players being able to do what players want to do. The players create the stories, and CCP is just like, nope, we create the story behind the players' back. It's kind of like that breaking of the immersion, which was kind of shitty.
Well, that wasn't the selling point back then, though. It was a different game. So.
Well, yeah.
Butterfly effect and emergent gameplay, all that came later.
Right. So, but to get back to the topic of, won't they be biased? Won't they do this? Won't they do that? I'd just like to point out that CCP has continued to, and is continuing to play this game regardless of this rule. And since T20, the devs play. They've always played. It's just that the biggest issue has been since T20 was if they get discovered, they burn the character.
Which makes them not want to play in situations that they can be easily discoverable. So, for instance, most devs are probably in wormholes where it's a lot harder to identify them, and they're probably in a group together. So they're not really playing.
Opposite, right? The benefit now is that if someone says, "Oh, but you don't know how it is to actually play in X group, right? You don't know how it's how operations work in Goons, or you don't know how things are in Test or in PL." Now the devs can actually come out and say, "Of course I do. I have alts in there. I've been in there for years. Look, these are my characters. Shut the fuck up." This is a massive benefit, right? That now they can now they can actually say, well, you can't claim that we're not playing the game. You can't claim that we don't understand how things work. Well, I still want to see the log files that shows that Fozzie has been actually self-wanding, but that's a different story, right?
Going forward, though, I just want to add real quick, Matter. I'm so sorry, but I gotta say this.
No, jump in.
Nullsec, this is like the ugly side is the fact that there are a lot of really smart technical people in Nullsec, and if I was a CCP dev, knowing what I know about how crazy the spies get and how alliances try to protect themselves by gathering data about different people that interact within their community to try and out spies. If I was there and I was busy, building up a character, building a story, acquiring assets, playing Eve, I would not want to touch Nullsec with the old rules with like a 200,000 foot pole, because they have these crazy tools that let them know, like, you don't know if you forgot to turn your VPN on in the morning, and all of a sudden now someone sitting in Test IT or PLIT now sees an Icelandic, IP next to your name, like that kind of, that's a very crude example, but that's kind of what I wanted to bring up, is that now this allows them to not have to risk months, if not years, of enjoyment and the same thing that gets all of us to play, which is, the continuing story. Now they can actually be a part of that.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so the point of this was that for a long time, it's taking, I agree with Caleb, it's taking the criticism of devs don't play this game, therefore they can't design it properly, off the table. And what it also does is it keeps them from having to do all the VPNing stuff and disguising that they're from Iceland. Because again, the threshold for getting into alliances can be very rough. There's a lot of security involved in getting into an alliance. And a lot of their IP address is one of the things that can be discovered. And once you're in Iceland, you're already suspect. So people are going to watch what you do and watch what you say, etc. So
and
there's a lot of work involved. What's that?
Let's just point out that when it comes to abuse, if you're doing something that is deliberate abuse or favoritism that with actual advantage, right? This is a firing offense. You will be laid off from CCP. What developer would be that stupid to actually do something like this ever again? It happened once because none of these rules or things were actually discussed yet, right? So we're in a completely different scenario. I can't imagine any scenario where a dev would risk doing something like this and get laid off. Then you could, of course, argue that, well, might they do something like that if they have been fired or are on the way to leave the game? Sure, maybe, but that's a totally different story.
All right, let's move on to, I think, something that's pretty interesting, and I may disappear for this one because we're running out of time. We only have like 7 minutes left. What is this thing that's going to go on CC tomorrow or Tuesday? Yeah, tomorrow for us. That is a big mystery. All it's called is the Internet Relay or something, right?
Hyperlink
Relay. We don't know what it is, but we know that it's going to be on CC tomorrow and that it's market related.
Is it market related?
I believe it's market related, because when they were talking about this new thing that they were going to do in regards to markets, that graphic was up behind them.
Yeah.
But they never put the things together. But you could tell because that was the graphic that was up there. So then when you saw the video that said, here's our new features, you have this hyperlink relay, you have the same picture that was used when they were talking about the market thing.
Well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, of course, we need someone like Ash to confirm this. But I think the whole point of that term, law-wise, is what is running the SCC market, basically. So it's the internet of EVE Online, right? So it must be tied somehow to market-related things. I just don't know what exactly.
Yeah. It's very interesting because a lot of people say, well, you'll be able to buy Plex on your mobile phone. That seems very logical. It's something they've announced in the past. But this actually sounds like a new thing. And my impression is that because they're building up JITA, they want JITA to remain one of the centers of gravity. And I think what you'll see is some maneuvers to kind of retain JITA as a place of interest, or why else would they put so much effort into designing its model and all that other stuff? So I think you're going to see an attack on offshoring practices that players do with, especially with their structures alongside of JITA, siphoning out a lot of, especially the RMT money going into JITA. Now, why they would do that, I don't know. I personally think those structures and the offshoring is an interesting mutation on some effects, but it's unintended consequence. I also think it's just
they wouldn't hit offshoring in any way. Maybe with Plex they might hit offshoring because it's pretty dumb, but anything else, it's intended. They want people to move out onto structures. This creates content. So if they were going to nerf something like offshoring for everything else market wise, that would just be shooting themselves in the face, because that's actually an extremely healthy thing for the economy.
CCP Oracle, hi. Thanks for correcting us. It's Hypernet Relay.
Hypernet Relay. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what we said before, but let's correct that. Hypernet Relay is this feature.
In parallel, I think the fluid router network is what runs the chat in law-wise, but I'm pretty sure this one is what runs the SEC market.
Like Arcanor 1981 says, Hyperlink is Elon Musk building a highway underground linking the market hubs. He goes, by the way,
yes, bring back the highways. Bring back the highways. Thank you. One jump from Ulay to any of the market hubs. Thank you very much.
Well, again, don't know what it is, but it's interesting. Again, it's going to go on the test server tomorrow, so we're going to be scouring there. We do know that the wallet is going to be upgraded and look a lot different. It's a little more cohesive and graphic. They're putting the loyalty points up there with ISK and Plex, and now you're starting to see the currencies of EVE Online, which I think is pretty cool. And they're giving loyalty points a higher profile there, so you can access what you have better. It used to be tucked away in the journal window where your missions were. So it's kind of like your points for the missions that you're completing. It all seemed to go together there. But you use those loyalty points to buy stuff at what's called a loyalty point store. Now you need ISK to buy the thing, but the loyalty points that you spend allow you to get the enhanced version of it, the military version of it, which is a little bit better than the normal version of it. And so I think what they're doing is they're saying, okay, it's no more just a reward for these missions that you run. We're going to put that into your wallet so you can see how much ISK you have and how many loyalty points you have all in the same place. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, to me, this is a classic example of a successful, well, soon to be successful UX change, right? A user experience related topic. Because for me, I look at them as a currency. And so obviously in my mind, I'm like, oh, of course I can find all of my currencies in my wallet. And I really appreciate CCP sitting down and doing this kind of change and this kind of work, because you don't really see there being a lot of public support for this kind of stuff. UI UX is oftentimes quietly done, and people are like, oh, now I can click on this, and then they don't even mention it. They don't change how those small little things drastically impact their experience just by opening the client and interacting with the game on a day-to-day basis. So I'm 2 thumbs up for this kind of change.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'm excited for it, but we'll see. You're talking about the wallet, which is great. And I like that kind of a change too. Anything that related to market, I'm very interested in. So is Caleb. So we'll have a look at what that actually is. Caleb, do you have any idea what it is?
Well, there's a lot of talk about whether or not it's some sort of change to regional market trade and the whole fog of war thing. And Lich and I have been pretty much banging on about the fact that if CCP are lowering this or bringing some sort of universal market where location is no longer meaningful, it's really risky, because one of the unique selling points of EVE when it comes to markets is that it's such a close thing to a simulation of real world markets with an actual free market design where everything is fungible and nothing is unique, which really brings on the whole thing of why you can use EVE Online to do actual tests of theories of a financial sort. It's just if they remove some of these unique things and make them, I don't know, call it easier by saying that the access for newer players is more important than this whole simulation, I think they are losing something extremely important, because it's what makes EVE so dynamic and ecosystem oriented, right? Yeah. It's why the game works. Creation, destruction, and a market that works exactly like what you would expect in real world. That's pretty much the unique recipe that CCP's got that no one else has. If they start messing with that, they might as well just turn off the service or make a completely new game.
I thought it was very curious that they did not want to try to explain it. And I don't know if that was because either it's not easily explained, or if it's supposed to be, I don't think it's supposed to be this, well, it's no longer chaos, but it's now like the evolution of the game, right? But something that you just spring on players. I don't think that's it, because they announced it's going to be on the test server, so it's not a surprise. I just feel like I don't think they wanted to get into it on stage, maybe because it needed some explanation, and I don't know if they thought that was the right venue to release it, at least talk about it. This is a very curious thing.
They may have been hesitant to nail down any particulars. Maybe they were deciding a couple of different routes they might take.
I just find it a little bit offensive that if this is something massive, some big change, right? The fact that it was not even hinted at in the CSM Summit minutes, I find a little bit offensive, because this is something that we as players needed to at least know something about. There's a limit to the scale of change that you should ghost patch onto the game, in my opinion.
Yeah, but you can't really forecast changes to the economic system without people figuring it out and figuring out how to benefit from it long before it hits the game, or other players have figured it out. So they have to be very careful with economic things.
This is similar to many have talked about removing Plex from actually being traded in game. Well, stuff like that, it's something that you need to have an open discussion about, because it's such a unique thing and such a unique part of EVE. So removing it is way too much shock to the system. Something like this could be worse than Blackout, in my opinion.
Yeah, it could be devastating if it's the wrong thing, or if it's something that players don't know how to handle. I don't know. It could be really devastating. But also, I don't think they would have just said, hey, there's this thing that's coming and that's it, we're not going to talk about it, if it was something that they needed to, if they were worried was going to be a bigger deal. But who knows? I mean, look at the way they treated Blackout when it ended. They just kind of said, weather's changing. So we'll see. Anyway, Hypernet Relay, the one last guess I have with this is that it is another thing they talked about a long time ago, is there is NPCs moving stuff from one station to another for you. So some kind of a hauling fee where caravans would be able to move, NPC caravans would be able to move stuff for you. And that might be something. But this is Hypernet, which means it's not physical. It's probably through the communication towers. So then you start thinking about Plex being traded, or maybe regional visibility. I think somebody just wrote that, actually. I'm sorry, I can't find who it was that wrote that. Maybe Dragon Teeth? Yeah. Said something about now you can see markets from, well, he didn't say this, but maybe you could just have a different visibility of what you're able to see and transact with. So maybe you're able to buy outside your system, something like that. I've always thought that light years made more sense than regions, or maybe a combination of both. So you'd have more regional flavor, but you would have a visibility that was based on light years, more distance based. But those are two different systems. The systems for regions, there's a lot of regional lock on things, right? Market's one of the main ones where there's regional locks on that. in other words, you can only see what's in your region, and you can only buy what's in your station. You can only buy what's in your, well, it gets complicated, but your region of skill buying and stuff. But you can only pick up what's in your station. And then you have, let me just finish this point. And then you have light years, which is what jump range is based on. So you can see a light year range from where you're at. Go ahead, Caleb.
It's just that there's a middle ground thing of something that would be in this area that I might actually accept and think would be a really good improvement if I could potentially call a different market just to view, not to interact, but to view when it comes to SEC. And if I could actually conclude contracts universally, this would actually be acceptable in my personal point of view, because I think there should be that difference between whether you are operating on an open SEC market like the NASDAQ, or whether you are phoning someone to conclude a contract in the other side of the world, right? Because contracts is actually almost like players doing player-to-player brokering, right?
Yeah.
But it's just invisible on the open market, just like there are many things market-wise in real life that are not visible to everyone, right? So you have these secondary marketplaces where you need access to actually be able to see what's going on, or even to participate. So there is things that could be changed that is not going to be detrimental. I'm just seeing that we need to go in the direction of more fog of war and more barriers of entry to actually improve the current market.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited about this Hypernet Relay. Let's check it out. It's tomorrow on the test server. I want to thank you guys for showing up, Caleb, Lichgrave, and Dalakar. Thanks very much, guys. We are going to raid Torvald. Stay tuned for that, and we'll see you tomorrow on... Actually, we're not going to see you tomorrow. I'm going to take tomorrow and the rest of this vacation off so I can just be free to do family stuff. So this will be the last show for a while. We'll be back after Thanksgiving when schedules resume, but we're all on vacation over here, so we'll stick around and do that. But you can catch us here at Discord for Talking in Stations, where we talk about this stuff all day long. That is talkinginstations.com. We will see you next week, and we're going to leave you off with Torvald here. Take care, everybody. I'll have to decide that. Maybe I'll do a surprise show of some sort.
You had good numbers today, by the way. Almost 100.